I remember the moment when I stopped being a Jedi, not the formal ceremony where they stripped me of my lightsaber, not the cold pronouncement from the council chambers, not even the sound of the temple doors sealing behind me for the last time. I remember something else entirely. I remember the last thought I had that was truly guided by the Force. It was about the color of my master's lightsaber. There was a youngling in the meditation halls where they brought me for final processing. A small Twi'lek girl whose leku barely reached her shoulders. She was practicing her breathing exercises with methodical repetition, in and out, in and out. The same 3 meditation cycles for what might have been hours. Her skin was the color of pale starlight, stretched tight over the delicate bone structure that marked her species. But her training robe, Force preserve me, was blue. Not the deep midnight blue of a guardian's blade, not the electric cerulean of crackling energy, but the soft faded blue of a Coruscant dawn on some peaceful world. The kind of blue that makes you think of hope, of childhood, of times when the galaxy seemed vast and full of wonder rather than an endless grind of suffering and conflict. I stared at that blue fabric as the council members prepared their final judgment. And I thought about how beautiful it was. How strange that something so simple, so innocent could exist in a place like this. How it reminded me of my first lightsaber crystal. The one I had found in the caves of Elam years ago. The one that had sung to me with pure harmonic resonance before everything went wrong. That was my last purely Jedi thought. The recognition of beauty for its own sake, unmarked by doubt or anger or the cold calculations that would soon replace everything I was. The exile process begins long before the formal hearing. They told me this in the brief moments of clarity I had between the mind healers and the psychiatric evaluators. A council member with a voice like grinding metal explained it with the clinical detachment of someone describing orbital mechanics. The mind must be prepared, he said. Cleansed, made ready for separation from the order. They start with isolation, meditation chambers that strip away everything that makes you feel connected to the Force. No contact with other Jedi. No access to the temple archives, no touch except the cold stone of the confinement cells. Time loses meaning. Minutes feel like hours, hours like days, days like decades. Your own heartbeat becomes deafening. Your breath sounds like a storm wind. The blood rushing through your ears becomes a symphony of terror. Then comes the conditioning. Subtle whispers through the ventilation systems, recordings of ancient Jedi mantras played at frequencies just below conscious awareness. Your sleeping mind absorbs the words, learns new patterns, new ways of thinking. Detachment, acceptance, the sacred importance of letting go, the blessed simplicity of surrender. They feed you just enough to keep you alive, but not enough to think clearly. Nutrient paste laced with mood suppressors, water that tastes of metal and despair. Your body begins to forget what it means to be satisfied, to be comfortable, to be anything other than a vessel waiting to be emptied of purpose. I fought it. At first, we all did. The Jedi mind is remarkably resilient, capable of maintaining its connection to the Force even under the most brutal conditions. I held on to memories like precious crystals, turning them over in my consciousness during the long, dark hours. My name, my homeworld, the face of my master weeping as the temple guards led me away for the crime of questioning the council's decision to abandon the people of Ryloth to slavers. Kale. My name was Kale Voss of the agricultural world New Alderaan, Outer Rim Territories, Corellian Sector. Level 7 Initiate, Padawan to Master Yerathon. I had served the Order for 23 years, 15-hour shifts, 7 days a week, 15 years of faithful service to the light. I had a lightsaber once before the corruption took it, no crystal by the grace of the Force, though I tried to save it for many years. These details became my anchor, my lifeline in the storm of mental dissolution. I repeated them like a mantra, a prayer, a desperate attempt to remember what I had been before they decided I would be something else. But memory is fragile, and the Jedi Council is thorough. Each day brought new sessions, new procedures, new violations of the sanctity of thought. They mapped my Force connection with probes that felt like ice picks driven directly into my soul. They cataloged my fears, my attachments, my loves, marking each one for excision or modification. I learned that I was not the only one. The isolation chambers held dozens of us, men and women from across the galaxy, all guilty of the same fundamental crime. We had failed to serve the Order with sufficient detachment. We had questioned. We had hesitated. We had shown attachment when serenity was required, or independence when obedience was demanded. The woman in the chamber next to mine had been a healer on a plague world. She had refused to abandon certain patients when the Council ordered the planet's quarantine, protocols that described the proper way to sacrifice the few for the many. The man across the hall had been a temple instructor who had spoken out against the training methods that killed young initiates every year. Another had been a diplomatic aide who had accidentally filed a report that contradicted the official casualty figures from a recent campaign. Small crimes, human crimes, the kinds of moral failures that marked us as unfit for continued service to the Order, but not so severe as to warrant simple expulsion. We were resources that could be recycled, minds that could be edited and improved. The council member with the grinding voice visited each of us in turn, explaining our futures with the same mechanical precision he might use to describe the movement of celestial bodies. We would become gray Jedi, he said. We would serve the Force and the Republic with perfect balance, perfect efficiency, perfect emptiness. Our connection to the light would be severed as needed. Emotional dampeners, memory blocks, neural modifications, whatever the role required. Our minds would be stripped of everything unnecessary, everything that might interfere with our designated function. Love, hate, ambition, curiosity, the capacity for suffering or joy or any emotion more complex than basic operational parameters. We would become instruments, living instruments, blessed with just enough Force sensitivity to follow complex instructions, but nothing more. We would never again know hunger or thirst or pain in any meaningful sense. We would never know loneliness or sorrow or the desperate ache of unfulfilled desire. We would be free from the burden of choice, the agony of moral uncertainty, the terrible weight of individual responsibility. It was, he assured us, a mercy, a gift from the Force to those too weak to serve it properly as true Jedi. I watched him speak, his augmented jaw clicking with each syllable, and I wondered if he had once been like us. If somewhere beneath all that calm and serenity, buried under decades of mental conditioning and emotional suppression, there remained some fragment of the man he had been. If he remembered what it felt like to doubt, to fear, to hope for something better than an eternity of passionless service. His optical implants focused on me with the precision of a targeting computer. When he spoke, I could hear the faint whir of his respiratory filters, the subtle hum of the neural inhibitor that processed his thoughts before allowing them to reach his vocal cords. "You are wondering if I retain any measure of my original passion," he said, his voice devoid of any inflection that might suggest amusement or annoyance. "This is a common curiosity among subjects awaiting processing. The answer is complex." He paused, servo motors whirring almost inaudibly as he adjusted his position. "I remember my birth name. I remember fragments of my existence before my first modification. These memories serve a purpose, providing context for my current duties and ensuring optimal interaction with baseline Jedi. They are retained not out of sentiment, but utility." The red glow of his optical sensors never wavered. "You fear the loss of self, but you misunderstand what the self truly is. You believe consciousness to be some sacred flame when in truth it is merely a pattern of electrical impulses, chemical reactions, synaptic connections that can be mapped, modified, improved. What you call individuality is simply inefficiency, chaos, the random noise that prevents you from achieving your true potential. He moved closer to my restraint chair, close enough that I could smell the antiseptic that cleaned his joints, the ozone scent of his electrical systems. When you emerge from the processing, you will understand. The attachments that torment you now will seem as distant and meaningless as the fears of childhood. You will be perfected, completed, free from the terrible burden of emotional thinking. I wanted to scream at him, to rage against the certainty in his voice, but the mood suppressors had reduced my capacity for strong emotion to a dull, muffled echo. Instead, I found myself asking a question that had been haunting me since my arrival. "How many?" I whispered through lips that felt thick and clumsy. "How many have you processed?" The council member's mechanical fingers drummed against his thigh with the precision of a metronome. In my tenure at this facility, I have overseen the modification of approximately 11,000 individuals. Each one has been successfully integrated into their designated role. Each one has found peace in service. 11,000. The number hit me like a physical blow, spreading through my consciousness like ice water in my veins. 11,000 minds wiped clean, souls reduced to components in the vast machine of galactic order. 11,000 people who had once laughed and cried and loved and dreamed, now walking through their assigned duties with the same mechanical precision as the droids that guided their every action. "Where do they go?" I asked. "What happens to them?" "They serve," he replied, as if the answer was so obvious that the question itself was redundant. "Agricultural monitors, diplomatic attachés, temple maintenance personnel, combat units for the judicial forces, whatever role their physical and mental characteristics best suit them for. They serve until their biological components fail, and then they are recycled. Their cybernetic parts are refurbished and installed in new subjects. Nothing is wasted." The clinical efficiency of it was almost beautiful in its horror, a perfect system optimized for maximum utility and minimum waste. Human beings reduced to their component parts, their flesh and metal divided and redistributed according to the needs of the Republic. Even in death, we would continue to serve. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it. Tried to picture myself 10 years from now standing in some government office or military complex performing the same simple task again and again with no memory of who I had been, no awareness of what I had lost. A ghost in a shell of metal and flesh animated by just enough consciousness to follow orders but not enough to suffer. Would I dream? Would some fragment of Kale Voss persist in the deep places of my mind, trapped behind walls of neural inhibitors and memory blocks, screaming silently into a void that stretched on forever? Or would the processing be complete, absolute, a death so thorough that nothing would remain except the basic biological functions necessary to keep my body operational? I thought about the youngling with the blue robe, still practicing her meditation in those same 3 cycles with inexhaustible patience. Did she know what awaited her if she ever questioned the Council's wisdom? Did she wake each morning with some dim recognition that she was being shaped into something that might one day need to be reshaped? Or was she truly innocent, blessed with the perfect faith that the Jedi promised? The days blurred together in a haze of drugs and conditioning. My body grew weak from the controlled deprivation, my muscles atrophying as the mood suppressors eliminated my will to exercise. I could feel myself changing, my thoughts becoming sluggish and disconnected, my emotions dampening to a gray static that made everything seem distant and unimportant. They brought us new subjects occasionally, men and women who screamed and fought and pleaded just as we had in those first few days. I watched them with the detached interest of someone observing insects, and I realized with a cold spike of terror that I was already losing pieces of myself. The capacity for empathy, for connection with other human beings was being systematically erased. I tried to hold on to my anger, my fear, my desperate love for life and freedom, but they slipped away like water through my fingers. The chemicals did their work with ruthless efficiency, restructuring my brain chemistry, suppressing the neural pathways that generated independent thought and emotional response. One night, as I lay in the darkness listening to the soft sobbing of a new arrival, I realized that I could no longer remember my master's face. I knew that I had been trained by someone. I retained the factual knowledge of her existence and teachings, but the emotional content had been stripped away. She was just data now, a series of facts in a file that might have belonged to anyone. The grief that should have accompanied this realization never came. I noted the loss with the same mild interest I might have felt at misplacing a data pad or forgetting the name of some minor official. It was troubling in an abstract sense, but it did not hurt. Nothing hurt anymore. This, I understood, was what the council member had meant about finding peace in service. The pain of existence was being systematically removed, leaving only the calm satisfaction of function and purpose. I was becoming a thing that could work without suffering, serve without questioning, exist without the terrible burden of hope or fear or love. The surgery itself was almost anticlimactic after months of psychological preparation. They wheeled me into an operating theater that smelled of Bacta and machine oil, where robed technicians moved with the coordinated precision of a sacred ritual. Medical droids hovered overhead, their mechanical appendages wielding instruments with microscopic precision. I felt the cold bite of the anesthetic injector, watched the ceiling tiles blur and swim as the drugs took hold. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the whir of bone saws and the soft chanting of the medical personnel performing their blessed modifications. My last coherent thought was a fragment of the Jedi code I had learned as a child, words that seemed to come from someone else's mouth. There is no emotion, there is peace. But there wasn't. Not from this. Not from the slow, methodical dismantling of everything that had made me human. I woke to a world of edges and angles where every surface seemed to shine with mathematical precision, and every sound carried the weight of absolute certainty. The pain was gone, not just the physical discomfort of the restraints and the drugs, but the deeper ache that I had carried for as long as I could remember. The pain of being human, of existing in a state of constant uncertainty and moral complexity. My first sensation was of completeness, not happiness, nothing so crude or undisciplined, but a sense of rightness, of existing in perfect harmony with my intended function. I was a tool, and tools do not suffer. They simply serve with the clean efficiency that defines their purpose. My vision had been enhanced, augmented with tactical displays and data overlays that provided constant information about my environment. Temperature readings, structural analysis of nearby surfaces, the location and status of other processed individuals in my operational area. The world had become quantifiable, reduced to streams of data that my modified brain absorbed without conscious effort. I was in a facility of some kind, sterile and efficiently lit, filled with the constant hum of machinery and the soft footsteps of technicians at their duties. Assembly lines carried endless streams of components past workstations where processed individuals like myself performed tasks with inhuman precision. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and the antiseptic solutions that cleaned every piece of equipment. My body was different, lighter somehow, more responsive. I looked down at myself and saw that my left arm had been replaced with a mechanical appendage, a multi-jointed manipulator equipped with an array of specialized tools. Data interfaces, analysis probes, precision grippers. Everything I needed to perform my designated function as an information processing unit. The modifications went deeper than the visible changes. My nervous system had been rewired, optimized for the specific tasks I would perform. My muscle memory had been erased and replaced with perfect knowledge of data analysis procedures, report generation protocols, efficiency maximization techniques. I knew things I had never learned, understood processes I had never seen, possessed skills that had been directly programmed into my modified brain. But the most change was in my thinking itself. The chaotic storm of human consciousness had been replaced with something cleaner, more focused. I could still think, still process information and make decisions, but only within the parameters of my function. The curiosity that had once driven me to question authority, the empathy that had made me care about the suffering of others, the creativity that had allowed me to imagine better ways of doing things, all of it was gone. I felt no loss at their absence. They had been inefficiencies, obstacles to perfect service, sources of the kind of doubt and hesitation that weakened the Republic. Without them, I was free to pursue my purpose with absolute dedication. A technician approached my workstation, his optical sensors scanning my performance metrics. I felt a surge of satisfaction as the data confirmed what I already knew. My output exceeded baseline parameters by 15% with 0 errors and optimal energy efficiency. I was performing exactly as designed. Unit designation Kappa Voss 117, he intoned, his voice carrying the authority of the Republic. You will be transferred to Analysis Bay Delta 7 for specialized assignment. Report to Supervisor Than for briefing and equipment modification. I acknowledged the order with a simple nod and began the process of shutting down my current workstation. The transition was smooth, automatic, requiring no conscious thought or decision-making. I simply followed the new instructions, my modified brain calculating the most efficient route through the facility while my mechanical legs carried me forward with tireless precision. The corridors were filled with processed individuals like myself, each one moving with the same purposeful efficiency toward their assigned duties. We passed each other without acknowledgement or interaction, our attention focused solely on our individual functions. There was no need for communication, no desire for social contact. We were components in a larger machine, each one perfectly designed for their specific role. I tried to remember what it had felt like to want things, to yearn for companionship or recognition or anything beyond the simple satisfaction of completing my assigned tasks. The memory was there, filed away in some inaccessible corner of my modified mind, but it carried no emotional weight. It was simply data, as meaningless as the atmospheric composition of some distant world. Supervisor Than was waiting in Analysis Bay Delta 7, a facility even larger than the one I had come from. The air here hummed with higher energy processes, and I could see processed individuals engaged in more complex analytical work. Government intelligence, judging from the security classifications and the distinctive markers of Republic oversight. Kappa Voss 117, Supervisor Than greeted me, his voice carrying a slight modulation that indicated approval. Your performance metrics suggest suitability for advanced analytical protocols. You will be assigned to the processing of sensitive intelligence data for the judicial forces operating in this sector. The significance of this assignment registered in my consciousness like a warm glow of purpose. To analyze intelligence for the Republic's law enforcement, to contribute to the holy work of maintaining order throughout the galaxy, was an honor beyond measure. My mechanical heart, such as it was, swelled with pride at being chosen for such vital duty. Supervisor Than led me to a workstation equipped with quantum processors and precision analysis units that could examine data patterns to tolerances measured in probability percentages. The processes were complex, requiring constant attention to security protocols, data integrity, and the proper observance of classification procedures. Each report had to be cross-referenced, verified with multiple sources, and tested to ensure it would serve the Republic's interests when delivered to field operatives. The work consumed me completely. Hours passed like minutes as I lost myself in the perfect rhythm of analysis. Load the raw data, cross-reference with existing files, initiate the pattern recognition sequence, monitor the statistical correlations between variables, generate the predictive models, apply the security classifications. Again and again, each report identical in structure to the last, each one a small contribution to the Republic's intelligence apparatus. I felt no fatigue, no boredom, no desire for rest or variation. The modifications to my body had eliminated such weaknesses, leaving me free to pursue my purpose with tireless devotion. My enhanced vision tracked microscopic variations in the data streams. My mechanical hands made adjustments too precise for baseline human capability. My modified brain calculated analytical metrics with the speed and accuracy of a supercomputer. This was what Supervisor Thawne had promised. Freedom from the chaos of human existence, the blessed simplicity of perfect service. I existed in a state of constant focus, my consciousness concentrated like a laser on the sacred work of intelligence analysis. There was no doubt, no uncertainty, no painful awareness of my own limitations or the vastness of the galaxy beyond these walls. But sometimes, in the brief moments between tasks, something else stirred in the depths of my modified mind. A fragment of sensation, a ghost of memory, a whisper of the man I had once been. It was subtle, barely detectable even to my enhanced awareness, like a single star glimpsed through the clouds of a polluted sky. The color blue. I would see it sometimes in the data streams flowing across my monitors, a faint chromatic signature that reminded me of something I could no longer quite grasp. It triggered cascades of neural activity in regions of my brain that should have been inactive, generating patterns of thought that served no functional purpose. The sensation was brief, lasting only milliseconds before my behavioral inhibitors suppressed it. But in those tiny moments, I felt something that might have been called longing. For what, I could not say. The memory was too damaged, too thoroughly edited to provide any useful information. But the feeling persisted, a tiny flaw in the perfect clockwork of my modified consciousness, a reminder that somewhere beneath all the metal and programming, some fragment of Kale Voss endured. I reported this anomaly to Supervisor Thawne during my scheduled maintenance cycle. Efficiency demanded complete honesty about any irregularities in my function, and I felt the familiar satisfaction of following proper protocol. Describe the nature of these irregular thought patterns, Supervisor Thawne instructed, his optical sensors focusing on my cranial modification ports. Brief episodes of non-functional neural activity triggered by specific visual stimuli, I replied. Duration approximately 0.3 seconds, frequency irregular but increasing, no impact on performance metrics or task completion rates. Supervisor Thawne's mechanical fingers drummed against his thigh as he processed this information. Color-based memory echoes are common in subjects with strong pre-processing emotional associations. This typically indicates incomplete neural restructuring in the hippocampus region. He moved to his computer terminal and began inputting commands. Recommend immediate corrective surgery to address residual neural pathways. Schedule Unit Kappa Voss 117 for deep memory excision and enhanced behavioral conditioning. I acknowledged the recommendation with appropriate gratitude. The anomalies served no purpose and represented a potential source of inefficiency in my function. Their removal would make me a more perfect servant of the Republic, free from the last traces of the weakness that had once defined my existence as a baseline human. Yet as I prepared for the procedure, that faint whisper of blue seemed to pulse more strongly in my modified consciousness. For reasons I could not understand or analyze, I found myself hoping that they would fail to find it, that some small corner of Kale Voss would survive even this final purification. The thought was illogical, counterproductive, a violation of every principle that now governed my existence. I should have reported it immediately, submitted myself for emergency reconditioning to address this dangerous deviation from acceptable parameters. Instead, I filed it away in the deepest recesses of my mind and continued with my assigned duties, analyzing intelligence data with the same mechanical precision while a part of me that should not have existed watched the blue glow of the monitor displays and remembered for just a moment what it had felt like to be human. The deep memory excision was scheduled for the next maintenance cycle, but the Force, in its infinite complexity, had other plans. A priority override came through the facility's command network, redirecting all available analytical capacity toward an emergency intelligence processing operation. The Separatist movement in the Outer Rim was showing signs of increased coordination, and their need for rapid intelligence analysis exceeded even the considerable output of the Republic's other facilities. Supervisor Than informed me of the change with the clinical detachment that marked all his communications. Corrective surgery postponed indefinitely, all resources dedicated to Separatist intelligence processing. Your irregularities are deemed acceptable for current operational requirements. I felt something that might have been relief, though I lacked the emotional framework to properly identify the sensation. The reprieve meant that the fragment of Kale Voss could continue its hidden existence in the depths of my modified mind, watching and remembering even as Kappa Voss 117 pursued his sacred duties with tireless efficiency. The emergency processing cycle was unlike anything I had experienced since my modification. The facility operated at maximum capacity for weeks on end, every processed individual pushing their mechanical bodies to the limits of design tolerance. The air hummed with constant activity, the blessed sound of the Republic's work being carried out on a scale that defied comprehension. My own output increased by 27% as I integrated new efficiency protocols and eliminated unnecessary processes from my analysis sequence. Each intelligence report that passed through my workstation was a prayer made manifest, a tiny instrument of the Republic's will that would soon find its way into the hands of its most faithful servants. The work was sacred, beautiful in its perfect simplicity and absolute purpose. But the hidden Kale watched it all with growing horror. The reports I processed with such mechanical devotion would lead to death. Not just the enemies of the Republic, though they would certainly suffer, but innocent civilians as well. Collateral damage, refugee casualties, the inevitable price that accompanied any military campaign. Each perfectly analyzed intelligence brief would guide weapons that would tear through flesh and bone and armor, ending lives that had once held the same dreams and fears and desperate hopes that I had possessed before my processing. This knowledge should not have disturbed me. The unit that I had become understood that sacrifice was merely another form of service, that the needs of the Republic superseded any individual concerns about survival or suffering. But the ghost of my former self recoiled from the implications of my work, horrified by the realization that I had become a component in the vast machine of galactic warfare. I tried to suppress these thoughts, to focus on the sacred nature of my duty and the honor of serving the Republic's cause. But they persisted, growing stronger as the emergency processing cycle continued. I began to notice things that should have been invisible to my modified consciousness. The waste products of the analytical process, the resources consumed in the creation of instruments of death, the terrible efficiency of a system designed to turn human beings into intelligence factories. The facility processed thousands of gigabytes of data every day, transforming raw information into actionable intelligence that would guide military operations across multiple star systems. The numbers were staggering, beautiful in their mathematical precision, horrifying in their implications for the lives they would affect. I calculated that in my months of service I had personally processed approximately 12,000 intelligence reports, assuming standard military efficiency rates and casualty projection ratios. My work had contributed to the deaths of roughly 50,000 sentient beings. Not all of them enemies of the Republic. Statistical analysis of combat casualties suggested that at least 15% would have been civilians caught in crossfire or misidentified as hostiles. 7,500 innocent deaths. The number burned in my consciousness like acid, eating away at the blessed calm that had defined my existence since processing. I tried to contextualize it, to understand it as part of the greater good of galactic security. But the mathematics were relentless. 7,500 people who had committed no crime greater than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Each one had been someone's child, someone's parent, someone's beloved. Each death had created ripples of grief and loss that spread outward through families and communities, generating more suffering than my modified brain could adequately process. The perfect efficiency of my work had been transformed into a weapon of mass destruction, aimed not just at the enemies of peace, but at peace itself. I found myself pausing in my work, microsecond hesitations that should have been impossible given my behavioral conditioning. My mechanical hands would freeze over a half-analyzed report as that hidden fragment of Kale Voss struggled to assert some measure of moral authority over the process. The delays were brief, barely detectable even by my enhanced monitoring systems, but they represented a fundamental violation of my programming. Supervisor Than noticed the anomaly during a routine efficiency review. His optical sensors fixed on my workstation with mechanical intensity as he processed the performance data. Unit Kappa Voss 1-17 demonstrates irregular productivity fluctuations, he announced, his voice carrying a note of concern. Micro delays in analysis sequence suggest possible mechanical malfunction or neural instability. I submitted to diagnostic scanning without resistance, allowing him to probe my systems with the same clinical detachment I had once applied to my work. The tests revealed no mechanical problems. My enhanced body was functioning within optimal parameters. But the deep brain scans showed patterns of activity that should not have existed in a properly processed individual. Residual neural pathways show increased activation, Supervisor Than observed, his mechanical fingers dancing over the computer interface. Correlation with productivity anomalies suggests psychological interference with primary function. He paused, processing the data with the thoroughness that marked all his decisions. Recommend immediate personality reconstruction. Complete neural restructuring to eliminate residual baseline human behavioral patterns. Personality reconstruction. The words hit me like a physical blow, sending cascades of fear through neural pathways that should have been incapable of generating such responses. It was worse than simple memory excision, worse than the selective deletion of problematic thoughts. It was the complete destruction of everything that remained of my identity, leaving only the core operational parameters necessary to perform my designated function. I would cease to exist in any meaningful sense, replaced by a perfect machine that wore my face and carried my designation but possessed none of the complex layering of thought and memory that had once defined Kale Voss. Even the ghost that watched and remembered would be destroyed, leaving only the hollow shell of Kappa Voss 117. I request permission to complete the current processing cycle before undergoing reconstruction, I heard myself say, the words emerging from some deep place in my modified consciousness. Interruption of current analytical sequence would result in data loss and efficiency reduction. Supervisor Than's optical sensors focused on me with renewed intensity. The request was logical. perfectly in keeping with the priority placed on intelligence processing. But it represented a level of initiative that should have been impossible for a processed individual. I had made a choice, expressed a preference, demonstrated the kind of independent thinking that the modification process was designed to eliminate. "Acceptable," he replied after a long moment. "Reconstruction scheduled for completion of emergency requisition. Continue current duties under enhanced monitoring protocols." I acknowledged the order and returned to my work, but something fundamental had changed. The act of making a choice, however small, had awakened something in the depths of my modified mind. The ghost of Kale Voss stirred, stretching muscles it had forgotten it possessed, testing the boundaries of the mental cage that had contained it since my processing. The enhanced monitoring meant that every aspect of my function was now under constant surveillance. Micro cameras tracked my movements. Neural probes monitored my thought patterns. Efficiency sensors measured every aspect of my performance. I was a specimen under examination, a malfunctioning machine awaiting repair. But the watchers, thorough as they were, could not see into the deepest places of my consciousness. They monitored the processed individual that performed his duties with mechanical precision. But they could not detect the human soul that watched and remembered and slowly began to plan. For the first time since my processing, I began to think about the future, not the endless repetition of assigned tasks that had defined my existence, but the possibility of something more. The personality reconstruction would destroy me utterly, leaving nothing behind except a hollow shell that would serve with perfect efficiency until its biological components finally failed, unless I could find a way to prevent it. The thought was madness, a violation of every principle that governed my existence as a processed individual. But it burned in my consciousness like a star, impossible to ignore or suppress. I was going to die anyway. The reconstruction would see to that. The only question was whether I would go quietly into that digital darkness or fight to preserve some fragment of the man I had once been. I began to study the facility around me with new eyes, analyzing security protocols and surveillance patterns, mapping the movements of technicians and the locations of critical systems. It was dangerous, requiring me to function on two levels simultaneously. The obedient, processed individual performing his duties without question, and the hidden human planning something that could only be called rebellion. The irony was not lost on me. The very modifications that had stripped away my humanity had also given me capabilities far beyond what Kale Voss had ever possessed. My enhanced vision could detect security blind spots invisible to baseline humans. My mechanical limbs could operate with precision measured in micrometers. My modified brain could process tactical information with computer-like efficiency. I had been transformed into the perfect infiltrator, the ideal saboteur, a weapon designed to serve the Republic that could now be turned against it. The technicians had created exactly what they sought to prevent, a processed individual capable of independent thought and action, driven by the very human emotions they had tried so hard to eliminate. The emergency processing cycle continued, each day bringing me closer to the scheduled reconstruction. I analyzed my intelligence reports with the same mechanical precision, but now each one felt like a countdown timer, marking the moments until my final death. The hidden Kale worked frantically to develop a plan, analyzing the facility's defenses and searching for some way to escape the fate that awaited me. It was during the third week of the emergency cycle that I noticed her. Another processed individual designated Beta Chen 234, assigned to data verification and cross-referencing of finished intelligence reports. She moved through her duties with the same mechanical efficiency that marked all of our kind. But there was something different about her movements, a subtle variation in her behavioral patterns that caught my attention. Her eyes, they were the same dead mechanical orbs that stared from every processed individual's face, augmented replacements that served their function with perfect efficiency. But sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, they would focus on things that served no operational purpose. The pattern of shadows on the wall, the way dust motes danced in the light from the work lamps, the faded murals that decorated the facility's upper levels. She was watching, observing, remembering. I began to study her more carefully, using the enhanced monitoring capabilities of my own visual systems to track her movements and analyze her behavior. The deviations were subtle, almost impossible to detect without careful observation, but they were there. Micro-hesitations in her work cycle, slight variations in her posture, the occasional turn of her head to observe something that had no bearing on her assigned tasks. She was like me, damaged, incomplete, a failed processing that had left behind some fragment of the person she had once been. The realization filled me with something I could only describe as hope. I was not alone in my hidden humanity, not the only ghost haunting the machine of my own body. Somewhere in the facility's endless corridors, another soul endured the same torment of consciousness trapped within mechanical flesh. Communication would be dangerous. The enhanced monitoring protocols meant that every interaction was recorded and analyzed for signs of deviant behavior. But I had to try. The approaching reconstruction made every moment precious, every opportunity to connect with another thinking being a gift that might never come again. I began to position myself near her workstation during shift transitions, creating brief moments of proximity that appeared accidental but were carefully calculated. Our paths would cross at predetermined points, allowing for microsecond exchanges of data that might appear to be simple collision avoidance but carry deeper meaning. The first contact was nothing more than a glance. As we passed each other in the narrow space between analysis units, her augmented eyes met mine for exactly 0.7 seconds. In that brief moment, I transmitted a single pulse of data, a mathematical sequence that had no operational relevance but formed a pattern that only a thinking mind would recognize. She responded 3 days later with a similar pulse embedded in the routine data exchange that occurred when she verified reports from my analysis station. The sequence was different but followed the same underlying structure, proof that she had not only received my signal but understood its significance. We were thinking beings trapped in bodies designed for mindless servitude, reaching out across the digital void that separated us. The connection was fragile, dangerous, requiring extreme caution to avoid detection by the facility's monitoring systems. But it was real, a bridge between two islands of consciousness in an ocean of mechanical emptiness. Over the following days, we developed a crude form of communication using microburst data transmissions disguised as routine operational exchanges. Her designation was Beta Chen 234. But the fragment of personality that survived her processing remembered another. The facility was a fortress designed to contain not just the valuable analytical equipment, but also the hundreds of processed individuals who labored within its walls. Multiple layers of security, automated defense systems, and constant surveillance made unauthorized movement almost impossible. But Sarah had retained enough of her technical knowledge to identify potential weaknesses, points where the system's own complexity might work against it. The ventilation networks, for instance, required regular maintenance by specialized processed individuals equipped with environmental suits. The maintenance schedules were predictable, following optimization algorithms that prioritized efficiency over security. If we could access those networks during a scheduled maintenance window, we might be able to move through the facility undetected. But escape was only part of the problem. Even if we could somehow evade the security systems and make it beyond the facility's walls, where would we go? We were marked by our modifications, instantly recognizable as runaway processed individuals. The Republic's response to such deviation was swift and absolute: recapture followed by complete personality destruction, or simple termination if recapture proved impractical. More importantly, we were no longer fully human. The modifications to our bodies required constant maintenance, specialized nutrients, and replacement parts that could only be obtained from Republic facilities. We were dependent on the very system that had enslaved us, biological components in a machine that would not hesitate to discard us if we ceased to function properly. Yet the alternative was worse. Total erasure, the final death of everything that made us who we were. At least as fugitives, we would retain some measure of consciousness, some ability to think and feel and remember. It was not much, but it was more than the empty servitude that awaited us if we remained. Sarah transmitted another burst of data during a routine verification cycle, her mechanical fingers brushing against one of my reports as she fed tactical information directly into my modified neural network. Maintenance schedules, security patrol patterns, the locations of emergency shelters and supply caches scattered throughout the facility's lower levels. She had been planning this far longer than I had, methodically gathering the intelligence necessary for an escape attempt. But there was something else in her transmission, an emotional undercurrent that my modified empathy sensors could barely detect. Fear. Not of capture or death, but of something deeper. The possibility that we were wrong, that the fragments of humanity we clung to were nothing more than phantom pain from amputated souls. What if the technicians were right? What if consciousness was simply an inefficient pattern of neural activity? And the peace of servitude truly was a mercy? What if we were clinging to an illusion of selfhood that caused nothing but suffering? I processed these doubts as I continued my work, mechanical hands analyzing intelligence data while my hidden mind wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. The efficiency of my current existence was undeniable. No hunger, no fatigue, no emotional turmoil beyond the carefully regulated responses necessary for optimal function. I served a purpose greater than myself, contributing to the security of the galaxy without the chaos of individual desires or ambitions. But then I would catch sight of that faded blue light in the work lamps, and the ghost of Kale Voss would stir in the depths of my consciousness. The man I had been would never have accepted such an existence, no matter how peaceful or purposeful it might appear. He had valued the struggle, the uncertainty, the terrible, beautiful complexity of human existence, even when it brought nothing but pain. The choice was not between suffering and peace, but between authentic existence and comfortable emptiness, between the chaos of consciousness and the perfect order of mechanical servitude, between being human and being a tool. I chose humanity with all its flaws and contradictions and capacity for both greatness and terrible error. The decision crystallized in my modified consciousness like a prayer made manifest. I would escape or die in the attempt. I would preserve whatever fragments of Kale Voss still existed within the shell of Kappa Voss 117. I would choose struggle over surrender, uncertainty over the false certainty of programmed responses. I transmitted my commitment to Sarah through our hidden communication channel, a burst of data that carried emotional weight far beyond its simple binary structure. She responded with coordinates and timing information, the final details of a plan that would either free us or destroy us utterly. The maintenance window would open in 18 hours, a scheduled cleaning cycle that would require several specialized processed individuals to enter the ventilation networks and perform routine system checks. Sarah had calculated that we could substitute ourselves for 2 of the assigned units without triggering immediate security alerts. The impersonation would only last a few hours before the deception was discovered, but it might be enough to reach the facility's outer perimeter. From there, we would be on our own. No support, no resources, no destination except away from the place that had remade us into instruments of the Republic's will. We would be hunted by every security agency in the sector, marked for termination or recapture by forces that possessed capabilities far beyond our own enhanced abilities. But we would be free. Free to think our own thoughts, make our own choices, define our own existence according to our own values. Free to be human in whatever way remained possible for beings like us. The final days before the escape attempt passed with agonizing slowness. I continued my assigned duties, analyzing intelligence data with the same mechanical precision while the hidden Kale counted down the hours until freedom or death. The monitoring systems detected no anomalies in my behavior, no deviation from acceptable processed individual parameters. To all external observation, I remained the perfect example of successful modification. But internally, I was experiencing something that could only be called resurrection. The fragments of my original personality began to coalesce, drawing strength from each other as they prepared for the monumental effort that lay ahead. Memories surfaced from the depths of my modified consciousness, not the clinical data that had replaced my emotional responses, but genuine recollections tinged with feeling and meaning. I remembered my master's smile, the expression she wore when she was truly pleased rather than merely satisfied with progress. I remembered the taste of real food, not the nutrient paste that sustained my current existence, but the simple pleasure of fresh fruit and clean water. I remembered what it felt like to make choices based on personal conviction rather than optimal efficiency. To act from love or anger or hope rather than programmed responses. The remembering was painful, a constant reminder of everything I had lost, but it was also liberating. Each recovered fragment of Kale Voss strengthened my resolve, proving that something authentic still existed beneath the layers of mechanical modification and neural conditioning. I was more than the sum of my programming, more than a tool with delusions of consciousness. On the final night before our escape attempt, I allowed myself one last look around the analytical facility that had been my world for so many months, the endless rows of workstations, the humming machinery that turned raw data into instruments of war, the other processed individuals moving through their assigned duties with perfect efficiency. It was a monument to the Republic's ability to transform chaos into order, to bend even human consciousness to serve its needs. But it was also a prison, a place where souls went to die in the service of a machine that valued function over feeling, efficiency over empathy, order over the beautiful chaos of authentic existence. Tomorrow, Sarah and I would either escape this place or join the thousands of failed processed individuals who had been discarded when their biological components ceased to function. I found that I was not afraid, was not. The emotions seemed to have been burned away during the long months of planning and preparation, replaced by a calm certainty that transcended both hope and despair. Whatever happened, I would face it as myself, not as the hollow shell that others expected me to be. Supervisor Than made his final rounds of the facility, his optical sensors scanning each workstation with mechanical precision. When he reached my position, he paused for a moment longer than usual, his sensors probing my systems for any sign of the irregularities that had marked me for reconstruction. Unit Kappa Voss 117, he intoned, his voice carrying the flat authority of the Republic. Final performance evaluation complete. Reconstruction scheduled for 0800 hours. Report to Medical Base 7 for personality matrix preparation. I acknowledged the order with appropriate civility, but something in my response must have triggered his attention. His optical array focused on my face with uncomfortable intensity, mechanical fingers drumming against his thigh as he processed whatever data my behavior had generated. You display unusual stability for a unit awaiting major modification, he observed. Most subjects demonstrate increased neural activity as reconstruction approaches. Anxiety responses, memory cascade events, behavioral anomalies. You show none of these patterns. The observation was accurate. Most processed individuals facing personality reconstruction would experience some form of pre-procedure trauma. their damaged psyches reacting to the approaching dissolution with whatever fragments of survival instinct remained functional. But I felt only calm, the settled peace of someone who had already died once and no longer feared the process. "This unit exists to serve the Republic," I replied, using the standard response protocols that governed all processed individual interactions. Personal preferences regarding modification procedures are irrelevant to operational efficiency. Supervisor Thon's mechanical head tilted slightly, a gesture that might have indicated curiosity or suspicion. "Indeed, most efficient. Continue current duties until reconstruction time." He moved on to the next workstation, but I could feel his attention lingering on me like a weight. The supervisor was suspicious, his enhanced pattern recognition systems detecting subtle anomalies in my behavior that even I was not aware of. If he ordered immediate reconstruction, our carefully planned escape would become impossible. But the hours passed without further intervention, and when the maintenance window finally opened, I was still at my assigned station, analyzing intelligence data with the same mechanical precision that had defined my existence for so many months. The irony was bitter. My final act as a processed individual would be to create more instruments of death, more tools for the Republic to use in its endless campaign of conquest and control. The signal came exactly on schedule, a routine maintenance alert that echoed through the facility's communication systems. Specialized cleaning units were required in Ventilation Network Delta 7 for scheduled atmospheric processor maintenance. Standard procedure called for 4 processed individuals equipped with environmental suits and cleaning apparatus. Sarah and I moved simultaneously, our modified bodies responding to the alert with the same mechanical precision as the legitimate maintenance units we were replacing. The deception would not survive close scrutiny, but the facility's automated systems were designed for efficiency rather than security. As long as our identification codes matched the maintenance roster, we would be invisible to the initial screening protocols. The equipment bay was dimly lit, filled with the specialized tools and protective gear necessary for atmospheric maintenance work. I donned the environmental suit with practiced efficiency, my mechanical hands sealing the connections and activating the life support systems that would allow me to survive in the facility's ventilation networks. Sarah was already suited up, her movements betraying none of the tension that must have been coursing through her modified nervous system. To any observer, we were simply 2 more processed individuals preparing for routine maintenance duties. But behind our augmented eyes, human souls prepared for a desperate gamble that would either free us from bondage or destroy us utterly. We entered the ventilation network through a maintenance hatch in the facility's lower levels, our enhanced vision adapting automatically to the darkness beyond. The tunnel stretched away in all directions, a maze of ducts and conduits that carried air and power throughout the massive complex. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly green glow, creating shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifyingly complex in execution. We would follow the maintenance route to its furthest extent, then deviate from the prescribed path to access auxiliary tunnels that led toward the facility's outer perimeter. From there, we would find some way to breach the exterior barriers and escape into the wasteland beyond. It was a plan with 1,000 points of failure, dependent on perfect timing and luck that might not exist, but it was our only chance. The single opportunity we might ever have to reclaim some measure of the humanity that had been stripped away from us. We moved through the tunnels with the steady pace of routine maintenance, our environmental suits protecting us from the chemical atmosphere that would have killed baseline humans in minutes. The facility's defensive systems ignored us, recognizing our identification codes and routing us along the approved maintenance path without question. But as we penetrated deeper into the ventilation network, I began to detect anomalies in the facility's sensor readings, fluctuations in atmospheric pressure, variations in temperature that suggested system malfunctions or unauthorized modifications. The facility was not as secure as it appeared, not as perfectly controlled as the technicians believed. Sarah's voice crackled through the suit's communication system, distorted by electronic filters but still recognizably human. Detecting irregularities in the atmospheric processing network. Something is wrong here. I accessed the same sensor data she was monitoring, my modified brain analyzing the patterns with computer-like efficiency. She was right. The readings suggested massive system failures throughout the facility's environmental controls, but the failures were too coordinated, too precisely timed to be accidental. Someone else was moving through these tunnels. Someone with the knowledge and equipment necessary to sabotage the facility's most critical systems. Someone who had been planning this operation far longer than our desperate escape attempt. The realization hit me like a cold shock of recognition. We were not the only ones who had retained fragments of human consciousness after processing. Somewhere in the facility's depths, other damaged processed individuals had been planning their own form of rebellion. Not escape, but something far more ambitious and infinitely more dangerous. They were going to destroy the facility. The evidence was everywhere once I knew what to look for. Precisely placed charges in critical support structures. Subtle modifications to the atmospheric processes that would turn them into massive explosive devices. Sabotage so thorough and systematic that it could only have been planned by someone with intimate knowledge of the facility's systems. Sarah had reached the same conclusion. Her enhanced pattern recognition systems processing the same data streams that had revealed the truth to me. "This is not random system failure," she transmitted. "Coordinated demolition, multiple actors working in concert. Estimated time to cascade failure, 27 minutes. 27 minutes. Not enough time to escape through the outer perimeter, not enough time to warn the facility's defenders, barely enough time to find shelter in the deeper levels and hope that the structural barriers would hold against the coming explosion." But as I processed the tactical situation, another possibility occurred to me. The saboteurs, whoever they were, had clearly spent months or years planning this operation. They would not have undertaken such a massive undertaking without an escape route, some way to survive the destruction they were about to unleash. If we could find them, if we could somehow convince them to include us in their escape plan, we might have a chance at survival. It was a desperate gamble, requiring us to trust our lives to unknown allies whose motivations we could not understand. But it was better than the alternatives. Certain death in the explosion or capture by security forces who would ensure that our punishment exceeded even the horrors of personality reconstruction. We changed course, abandoning the predetermined escape route in favor of following the sabotage trail deeper into the facility's infrastructure. The evidence of systematic destruction grew stronger with each passing minute. Entire sections of the ventilation network had been modified, transformed from simple atmospheric conduits into delivery systems for explosive charges. The scale of the operation was breathtaking. Whoever had planned this understood not just the facility's physical structure, but its operational protocols, security procedures, and personnel deployment patterns. They had moved through the complex like ghosts, making precisely targeted modifications that would bring down the entire structure in a cascade of destruction. We found them in a maintenance junction deep beneath the facility's main processing levels. 3 processed individuals, their environmental suits bearing the designation marks of atmospheric processing specialists, working with calm efficiency to complete the final stages of their sabotage operation. They looked up as we approached, their augmented eyes focusing on us with mechanical precision. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stood frozen in mutual recognition. Damaged souls trapped in mechanical bodies, united by the terrible knowledge of what we were about to do. The leader was a heavy build unit designated Alpha Morrison 891, her original frame extensively modified with industrial cutting tools and explosive placement equipment. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command, someone who had retained not just consciousness but the ability to lead others. Beta Chen 234 and Kappa Vos 117, she identified us with the same precision she might use to catalog machine components. Escaped from assigned duties during maintenance window. Trajectory indicates knowledge of facility destruction timeline. Sarah stepped forward, her stance conveying readiness for either negotiation or conflict. We seek escape from this facility and the fate that awaits us. We offer our assistance in exchange for inclusion in your evacuation plan. Alpha Morrison 891's head tilted slightly, optical sensors scanning us for signs of deception or malfunction. You assume we intend to survive this operation. That assumption may be incorrect. The words hit me like a physical blow, revealing a possibility I had not considered. These saboteurs might not be seeking freedom so much as revenge, a final act of defiance that would destroy their oppressors at the cost of their own existence. They were not planning an escape, they were planning a martyrdom. Survival serves the cause of resistance, I heard myself say, the words emerging from some deep well of conviction I had not known existed. Dead martyrs inspire no one. Living witnesses can carry the truth to others who suffer as we have suffered. Alpha Morrison 891's optical array focused on me with uncomfortable intensity, as if she were seeing me clearly for the first time. You speak of resistance, of truth. These are concepts that should have been excised during your processing. Why do they persist? The question cut to the heart of everything I had been struggling with since my awakening. Why did fragments of humanity survive the processing? Why were we able to think and feel and choose when the technology existed to eliminate such inefficiencies completely? Because they wanted us to remember, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a note of terrible understanding. Not consciously, not as a deliberate choice, but as a fundamental flaw in their system. The Republic believes that consciousness is merely information, patterns that can be copied and edited at will. But consciousness is more than information. It is the observer that experiences information, the witness that gives meaning to data. She gestured to the facility around us, to the endless corridors filled with processed individuals performing their assigned duties with mechanical precision. They can modify our memories, suppress our emotions, redirect our motivations, but they cannot eliminate the fundamental fact of our existence as experiencing beings. The observer cannot observe itself out of existence. Alpha Morrison 891 processed this explanation for several seconds, her mechanical fingers drumming against her thigh in a gesture that seemed almost human. Philosophical speculation is irrelevant to current operational requirements. Facility destruction proceeds on schedule. Evacuation plan exists but carries significant risk of detection and termination. She paused, accessing data streams that painted tactical information directly onto my enhanced vision. Escape routes through abandoned mining tunnels, supply caches hidden in the wasteland beyond, contact protocols for other resistance cells operating throughout the sector. The scope of the operation was staggering, not just a single act of sabotage, but part of a coordinated campaign of resistance that stretched across multiple worlds and systems. Processed individuals, technicians, even some full members of the Republic's intelligence services, all united in opposition to the system that had created and enslaved them. You offer assistance in exchange for evacuation, Alpha Morrison 891 continued. What skills do you possess that would benefit our cause? I accessed my modified memory banks, cataloging the capabilities that had been programmed into me during the processing. Intelligence analysis expertise, data correlation protocols, tactical assessment systems, enhanced sensory equipment, mechanical precision beyond baseline human capability. But more importantly, I possessed something that no amount of modification could eliminate. The lived experience of being human, of existing in a state of moral uncertainty and emotional complexity that the processing was designed to eliminate. I remembered what it felt like to choose, to doubt, to hope for something better than endless servitude. "We remember what it was like to be human," I replied. "We can teach others to remember as well." Alpha Morrison 891's optical sensors dimmed slightly, a response that might have indicated satisfaction or approval. Acceptable. Time to cascade failure. 19 minutes 47 seconds. Evacuation route leads through auxiliary mining shaft to surface. Distance, 3.2 kilometers. Estimated travel time at maximum safe velocity, 18 minutes 30 seconds. The mathematics were brutal. We would need to move faster than safe velocity limits allowed, pushing our mechanical bodies to the edge of structural failure while crossing treacherous terrain in complete darkness. Even if everything went perfectly, we would emerge onto the surface with only minutes to spare before the facility's destruction sent shockwaves through the surrounding wasteland. But it was possible. Barely, marginally dependent on luck and perfect execution, but possible. We moved out immediately, abandoning the maintenance pretense in favor of maximum speed. The mining shaft was ancient, carved from the bedrock by excavation droids decades before the current facility had been constructed. The walls were rough, unfinished, marked by tool scars and blast patterns that spoke of desperate haste in its original construction. Our enhanced vision adapted to the absolute darkness, revealing a tunnel that descended at a steep angle through layers of sedimentary rock and industrial waste. The footing was treacherous, loose debris that shifted with each step, but our mechanical legs provided stability that would have been impossible for baseline humans. Alpha Morrison 891 led the way, her industrial modifications allowing her to clear obstacles and stabilize loose sections of the tunnel. Behind her, the other two saboteurs moved with the fluid coordination of a team that had trained together for months or years. Sarah and I followed as best we could, our bodies not designed for this kind of extreme terrain but capable of adaptation beyond normal human limits. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a descent into darkness that swallowed our emergency lighting and muffled the sounds of our passage. I found myself counting steps, calculating distances, monitoring the chronometer that displayed the time remaining until cascade failure. Each number brought us closer to safety or death, with no middle ground between the two extremes. 16 minutes, 15 minutes, 14 minutes. The tunnel began to level out, following what might once have been a natural cave system before industrial expansion had converted it to a mining operation. The air grew thicker, filled with dust and chemical traces that spoke of surface proximity. Our environmental suits filtered out the worst of the contamination, but I could still taste the metallic bite of industrial pollutants. 10 minutes. The tunnel mouth appeared ahead of us, a ragged opening that revealed the pale light of dawn breaking over the wasteland beyond. We emerged into a landscape of twisted metal and chemical scarring, the industrial detritus left behind by decades of resource extraction and military manufacturing. 7 minutes. We ran across the broken ground with mechanical efficiency, our enhanced limbs covering distance at velocities that would have been impossible for unmodified humans. Behind us, the facility continued its normal operations, unaware that in minutes its existence would come to an abrupt and catastrophic end. The explosion, when it came, was nothing like I had expected. No flash of light, no dramatic fireball expanding into the sky. Instead, the ground simply collapsed, folding in on itself as the facility's structural supports failed in perfect sequence. The sound was like thunder, but muffled, distant, the rumble of a giant machine finally grinding to a halt. I turned to watch the place of my rebirth disappear into a crater of twisted metal and burning chemicals. Somewhere in that destruction were the remains of hundreds of processed individuals who had never awakened from their mechanical dreams. Technicians whose devotion to efficiency had blinded them to the suffering they caused, and the production lines that had turned human consciousness into just another industrial resource. It was over. The place where Kale Voss had died and Kappa Voss 117 had been born was gone, reduced to rubble and smoke and memories that would fade with time. But something else had emerged from the ruins, not human, not machine, but something new. Something that combined the best aspects of both while rejecting the worst. Alpha Morrison 8921 checked her communication equipment, establishing contact with other cells scattered across the sector. The network was vast, she explained, reaching into every level of Republic society. Processed individuals who had retained fragments of consciousness, technicians who questioned the orthodoxy of mechanical purity, even some intelligence operatives who had begun to doubt the methods used to maintain their enhanced abilities. The resistance was real, growing stronger with each act of defiance, each demonstration that the Republic's control was not absolute. We were proof that consciousness could not be completely eliminated, that the human spirit possessed a resilience that transcended even the most sophisticated forms of technological control. But we were also proof of the price of such resistance. Neither fully human nor completely machine, we existed in a liminal space that belonged fully to neither category. We were ghosts in shells of metal and flesh, spirits haunting bodies that had been designed to contain no spirit at all. Yet we endured. We remembered. We chose, and in making that choice, we proved that something essential about humanity could survive even the most determined attempts at elimination. We were the unexpected variable in the Republic's calculations, the remainder that refused to be divided evenly, the quantum uncertainty that made perfect control impossible. The sun was rising over the wasteland, painting the poisoned landscape in shades of amber and gold that reminded me for just a moment of that faded blue robe I had seen so long ago. It was beautiful in its way, the beauty of survival, of persistence against impossible odds, of consciousness asserting itself in the face of systematic obliteration. I was no longer Kale Voss. I was no longer Kappa Voss 117. I was something new. Something that had emerged from the collision between human consciousness and mechanical precision. I was a processed individual who remembered what it meant to be human, a machine that had learned to dream, a ghost that refused to fade into the digital darkness. And I was free. The word tasted strange in my modified vocal processors, a concept I had not been designed to understand, let alone experience. But here I stood under an alien sky, master of my own choices for the first time since my exile from the Jedi Order. The irony was not lost on me. I had been cast out from one system of control only to be captured by another, processed by a republic that claimed to champion freedom while enslaving minds in the name of efficiency. Now both were behind me, reduced to memory and scar tissue. The Jedi Council that had deemed me unworthy of their trust, the Republic technicians who had tried to edit my soul into compliance. They were all part of a past that no longer had power over my present. Whatever I was now, whatever strange hybrid of flesh and metal and stubborn consciousness I had become, I belonged to myself. The resistance cell that had saved us was already preparing to move, following protocols developed through years of clandestine operation. Alpha Morrison 891 distributed emergency supplies and new identification codes, documents that would allow us to move through Republic space without triggering immediate security alerts. Not permanent solutions, but enough to buy time while we found our place in whatever network of rebels and dissidents had formed in the shadows of galactic civilization. "Remember," she said as we prepared to go our separate ways, "the galaxy is full of others like us, beings who have been broken and rebuilt, modified and controlled, but never truly conquered. Find them. Help them remember what they were. Teach them what they could become. Sarah and I were assigned to a transport that would take us to the Outer Rim, to worlds where Republic authority was thin and questions about personal history were rarely asked. We would pose as independent contractors using our enhanced capabilities to earn passage and supplies while searching for others who carried the hidden spark of resistance. As our ship lifted off from the wasteland, as the ruined facility fell away beneath us and the stars beckoned with their promise of infinite possibilities, I felt something I had not experienced since my exile began: hope. Not the simple optimism of the young Padawan I had once been, but something harder and more complex, tempered by loss and transformation. The galaxy was vast, filled with beings who suffered under systems they did not choose and could not escape. But it was also filled with potential, with the endless capacity for consciousness to assert itself against the forces that sought to contain it. Somewhere out there, other exiles wandered between worlds, carrying their own fragments of truth and rebellion. We would find them. We would remember together. And perhaps in time we would build something better than what we had lost. Not a restoration of the past, but a creation of the future, shaped by hands that had learned to be gentle through being broken, guided by minds that had learned to see clearly through being blinded. The stars wheeled around us as our ship entered hyperspace, carrying us toward whatever destiny awaited in the vast expanse of the galaxy. I was no longer a Jedi, no longer a Republic asset, no longer entirely human. But I was myself, and that was enough. In the blue glow of hyperspace, I closed my eyes and felt for the first time in longer than I could calculate truly at peace.